Home from WAR. The end of World War II in 1945 brought thousands of young soldiers back to the USA. The USA had just begun its recovery from World War II, when suddenly the Korean conflict started in 1950. The USSR became a major enemy in the Cold War. This fact led to the invention of the atomic shelter. Each family, each house in the suburbs had its own shelter which was equipped with all the goods necessary for survival underground in case of a nuclear attack. Americans were feeling a sense of national anxiety. Was America the greatest country in the world? Was life in America the best in the world? One of the things which most characterizes the 1950s was the strong element of conservatism and anti-communist feeling. This is also called the atomic era, because both the USA and the USSR had their own nuclear weapons. The economic boom, new houses, new communities after the war. Thousands of young soldiers came back to America to start new lives and start new families in new homes with new jobs. With great energy, American industry expanded to meet peacetime needs. Americans began to buy goods which were not available during the war. Part of the 1950s boom in consumerism included housing. People started buying single-family houses and the suburbs were born. The typical suburban house is a two-story house with a small garden with freshly cut grass in front and a bigger garden in the back. There usually is one or more TV sets, a garage, 2 cars. The typical suburban family is white, with 2 children and 1 or 2 pets. For the first time ever, a booming, vibrant middle class emerged in the United States as a powerful political player. Identified by living in suburbs and increased consumer spending, this group would power much of America's drive to global dominance. Millions purchased homes, with many of them in the new suburbs built outside of major U.S. cities. The most famous of these suburbs is Levittown, on Long Island, with houses built almost exactly alike. It was in these suburbs that millions of Americans found their realization of the American dream. Combined with a steady, well-paying job, the classic American image of a two-parent household, with the father working and the mother tending to the needs of the home and children, was formed as a symbol of the 1950s. Consumerism. Consumerism was rising during the 1950s. The great American carmakers competed heavily for the loyalty of the customers that now considered a car in the driveway to be a birthright, despite the fact that many of their grandparents would have been lucky to have a horse. New technologies, such as television, and improvements to existing technologies, like radios, also helped to make sure that choices were everywhere, and the only way to vote for your favorite was to spend those hard-earned dollars. The rise of the new media. Perhaps the most important change in communications was the development in television broadcasting. During the 1950s, television became the dominant mass media because people watched it for more hours per week than before. In the early 50s, young people watched TV more hours than they went to school. What people saw on television was accepted as fact. Television created the ideal family, the ideal schools and neighborhoods, the ideal world. The new shows were sitcoms, quiz shows, soap operas. Generations at war. Conservative culture. These rebellious teenagers' 50s clothing was conservative. Men wore grey suits and hats. Women wore dresses with tight waists and high heels. Families worked together, played together and vacationed together at family theme parks like national parks and the new Disneyland. Girls played with Barbie dolls, boys with Roy Rogers and Davy Crockett. Drive-in movies became popular for families and teenagers. Cars were an indicator for prosperity and coolness. Highways, freeways took people quickly from one place to another. The big shopping centers, called shopping malls, were born. Teenagers were a separate generation and were represented by James Dean, who wore blue jeans in the film Rebels Without a Cause, Jovent Bruciati in Italiano, and created a fashion and an attitude. Music in the 50s is especially rock and roll. This new type of music, with strong black and southern origins, was popular with teenagers who wanted to break out of the mainstream conservative American middle-class mind. Popular artists were Bill Haley, Elvis Presley. There are no speaker notes on this slide. Minorities in the 50s. The black community. However, it wasn't a happy time for everyone, as women and minorities were often treated as second class compared to the white men who were the protagonists of the period. As late as 1955, anti-miscegenation laws existed in more than half of the 48 states, and marriage between blacks and whites was prohibited. Although racial segregation in schools became illegal in 1954, colored people had a long way to go before they could find their own place, their own rights in American society. Since the end of the Civil War, 1865, many laws have been made to improve the conditions of black Americans, but there are still many people who do not want to accept their complete integration into society. For a variety of reasons, schools and living conditions in black communities have often been inferior to those in white areas. Women. The role of women in the 50s was repressive and constrictive in many ways. Society placed high importance and many expectations on proper behavior at home as well as in public. Women were supposed to fill certain roles: caring mother, a diligent housewife, and an obedient wife. The perfect mother and wife had to stay at home, take care of the children, and carry out her husband's orders and agree with him on everything. TV shows portrayed a stereotypical image of women as inept, unable to drive, to control the family budget, unable to make decisions without their husband's help. A woman should never complain. Women were not supposed to study or be educated. Women who did not meet these standards and rebelled against them were considered strange, odd, crazy, hysterical, and in need of medication or hospitalization. The role of music. Music is freedom. Rock and roll seemed to directly challenge the system of segregation and conformism at the time. It encouraged white middle-class teenagers to dance and mix with other races and socio-economic levels. Parents and community leaders were very suspicious of this powerful new form of music that seemed to excite teenagers and make them break from the norm. There are no speaker notes on this slide.